Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today we're going to talk about a couple of things. The first is the Eisenhower matrix that Tim White sent over. We're going to explore it and see how it overlays on the change grid. I will tell you in advance it does, but in a very different way. So it should be fun for you guys to wrap your head around how to use this particular facet of the change cube. And then we'll get back to our discussion about the American values that are there. I think we're up to probably number 5 or 6 now. So here we go. Now, as I said yesterday, I'm more than happy to showcase anything having to do with Dwight Eisenhower because my middle name is Dwight. I was named after him. So a quote of his is, "What is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important." That's one of his little quotes. What is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important. And so that gave rise to this Eisenhower matrix. And quite honestly, I thought this was a Stephen Covey thing. I didn't know that it predated Stephen Covey's work. And then you go looking around and find out, oh no, this has actually been presented or repurposed and presented, countless times. So you'll find this matrix. It may not be labeled as the Eisenhower matrix, but you'll definitely see diagrams such as this that talk about the same thing. So who knew that it was Eisenhower's? In fact, does everybody know? Was it Eisenhower? Anybody? No, we'll just accept it as
good.
Yeah, I mean, because if I thought it was Covey's and it wasn't, now I'm thinking it's Eisenhower's. Is it? I don't know. So it could be, Socrates for all we know. Okay, anyway, nevertheless, this matrix is something we've seen before. It contrasts and combines the 2 dimensions of urgency and importance. And basically, the thought is that all work, all tasks, all activities, think about a change grid, for example, all of these tasks could be plotted into these 4 different squares. So of all these things, what are both urgent and important? And put a few in there. What about non-urgent, but still important? And then not important, not urgent, and not important, urgent. So this is kind of a fun thing to really be looking at. Does it overlay on the change grid? And if so, how? So any comments, thoughts anyone wants to share before we do our next little dive into this? All right. So I'm going to chat over to everybody the 2 PDF files for the change cube. You might want to look at one now, but I don't think it's really going to be critical for what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to show it to you on my screen. But okay, look at these two axes, important versus non-important. The fact is we already have that in the change cube, right? That's the 3rd dimension. So X and Y are their perceived level of ability, the perceived level of challenge, and the Z axis would be the perceived level of importance. So those are our 3 main axes. And then that 4th dimension, size, we just say, well, that's fine, but how big is it overall compared to everything else that needs to be done? So we're saying that these 3 axes create a cube, but that cube could be of many, 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 many different sizes, depending on how many resources the activity is going to consume. All right, so bottom line, we already know this one. So that obviously is our x-axis. What does this urgent versus non-urgent axis map to inside of the change grid or change cube?
In grid, out grid.
In-grid, out-grid. I would build a case for in-grid, out-grid. I could also build a case for anybody else?
Up grid, down grid.
Yeah, okay. Here's my kind of take on it. Yeah. I think it's going to be more about upgrade and downgrade because urgency and tension feel like they map to each other pretty tightly. So the more important it is, the more urgent it is. I don't know that it's true that the more urgent it is, the more important it is. There's going to be something's going to drop off at a certain point. But the other thing I can say is that people that are out grid would also say, oh no, this is very important and we need to get it done now. But I think the way that they're describing urgency is coming from that heartline outgrid, amiable driven driver kind of energy, as opposed to the kind of reactive nature of what we find upgrid. So,
That's interesting too, because the more urgent one perceives a task to be, I could see where we could easily think then it must be important as well.
right. And just because something's urgent doesn't mean it's important in the big scheme of things. And of course, if you guys have taught courses about prioritizing activities and, goals and all that sort of stuff, there can be a whole lot of things competing for a limited number of resources. And so
And it's also how you respond to your sense of urgency.
all right, tell us about that.
Well, I see what you're circling there, going upgrid as response to catastrophe.
All right.
Okay, at its outer bounds.
Yep.
And are you prepared for it?
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a catastrophe plan, then your urgency is to implement the plan,
Mm-hmm.
which takes you up to the outgrid.
Right. Yeah, we're in a movement from upgrid urgency to outgrid urgency. So I would rather not use that same word for both of these locations, but that's the essence of the word we're really looking for. So as Daniel pointed out, when things are happening to us that are upgrade, again, these are changes that are driven by what kind of factors?
External.
By external factors. So the urgency is something that's being imposed upon us, if you will. We're in the situation, we must respond. So hopefully we didn't invite this type of urgency into our reality. We're on
The
the
fire alarm just went off.
right, exactly, and we're reacting, responding. We're dealing with it in the moment. And so now, because there's an alarm, I'll probably also go, it's also important. So they seem to be making a lot of noise about this. So, all right, but you look instead at what's going on outgrid. I would certainly say that people that are these fully engaged driver types, these driven drivers, amiable driven drivers, obviously these expressive driven drivers. Okay, there's definitely a sense of urgency here, but that urgency doesn't feel like I'm reacting to something. It feels like something inside of me, right? Because rather outgrid changes are driven by what kind of factors? Internal factors. So this is a person who's made a choice, deliberate, intentional, calculated, all those good kinds of words. So it's almost like, are you really urgent, or are you just actively focused on executing? I don't know what word that is. Maybe that's why they use the word urgent to say this
Well,
kind of.
there's a steamroller or a locomotive.
Yep.
It's not in a hurry. It's just moving on down the road. Don't get in the way.
Right. And that's definitely the vibe, I think, of outgrid. Now, obviously, we are not in the danger zone. In the danger zone, that train's going to get a little bit crazy, but and it might derail itself and it might bang into something. So that's it.
Takes the curves too fast.
Exactly. But at this ideal location, you think about that. This is just, it's not so much that they even think that there's a sense of urgency. They're just in the moment. Using flow as our example, they're in the river. So this water is moving. There's a lot of it. It's moving fast. They're in that stream, navigating and doing everything they need to do to win the race or whatever the case may be. So I feel an urgent type of energy, but I don't know that that word describes the same sensations that someone who is upgrid experiencing urgency would feel.
Urgent puts time and drive together, doesn't it?
Urgent puts definitely time, drive for sure, because you got to take care of it.
And
So
time.
yeah, and time, well, right, because we got
Time compression, really.
right,
It's
because
it's the compression of time that creates the tension.
that's right. A lifetime passes before your very eyes. The whole scene plays out in an instant. And then you get to another situation. I think this is talking back to what Daniel brought up a couple of classes ago, this idea about surrendering when you are at a true powerless point. Rather than doing the maneuvers we talk about, you could also just go through the torus, come right up to the other side of the donut hole and let go. And so this idea about releasing could also be one way that we'd handle it. But point is that there's a difference between this sensation of urgency and this sensation of urgency. Now, if we agree that urgency is experienced upgrid, and certainly something that's happening outgrid still has I don't want a high level of drive. That's what we're looking at. Drive towards getting things done. If anything, it makes you wonder if they're creating urgency and up here they're responding to urgency. Or as Chris pointed out, this is something happening to you versus doing something about it. Right. If we're doing something very proactive.
Or perhaps that the one is oriented to survival and the other is oriented to mission.
I like that too. So that's great. But anything that we can do to kind of say, listen, right here where things are still very healthy for this driven driver, there is an energy that we may have been labeling as urgency, but it's different. It's very different. Now, I would say too that if I drew a line right here at 10 for a perceived challenge, I would suggest to you that urgency exists in one form or another all across this upper level of challenge kind of thing. The difference how I respond to that urgency or reflect on and respond to that urgency is based on my perceived level of ability.
Yeah, I think it's complicated when you look at team dynamics too, because one group may have a matter that is urgent to them, but they need the resources or the partnership of another group, and to that other group, it's not an urgent matter for them.
That's right.
So they may not put the attention into it, and then you have that conflict and high levels of tension.
Right.
I think that word perceived is key in this.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Brian, and then Daniel.
I was saying the word perceived is key to these expressions because you're going to elicit different neurochemicals that's driving, your response factor in there.
Yep. Okay, Daniel, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I think he just got it.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So obviously, we know enough about the change grid to know that all sorts of things are changing as we move from one spot to another spot on the change grid. But this idea about where does urgency live on the change grid? In fact, I believe that we've always used a hallmark descriptor of power stress as having a sense of urgency to do that. And the dark side of urgency is if you're doing something impulsively, so there's a lot of squandering of resources that can occur up here. Where out here, we would say that there may still be a hurry. How do I put this? What example can I give you guys of this?
Well, I agree with you, T, and I was just thinking that as well. When you think in terms of the allocation of resources, that decision has to be made as to where to place those resources. Do you place it on what's urgent or do you place it on what's important? And the perception of those two is going to be critical to answering that question.
That's right.
And I don't know, I've been retired for many years, but it used to be, that managers ran around pissing on fires.
Yep.
Instead of, attending to what they're supposed to be doing and having other people take care of the little blazes.
Yep. That's still the case today.
Yeah, I suspect.
Yeah, managers, like anyone else, they have to pay attention to where they find their tension, and problems get far more attention than the healthy, strong resources that someone might
T, given given the fractal nature, I'm sure you guys have discussed about the change grid.
Yep.
Right, where each grid square is equivalent to the entire grid.
That's right. Yep. Zoom
then
in.
Maybe urgency lives at a different level than the top level.
Well, and so what other level? Where do you think urgency would begin?
Above the heart line.
Above the heart line. So let's take a look at this for just a second. So we're not going to worry about how this rotates yet. That's coming up very soon. But urgent and important. If we're saying that the urgency has to basically be the point where oh my goodness, the hard line is where the urgency is going to begin, and it's going to happen up grid and it's going to happen out grid, even though we don't have another word for this. Is that what you're? So there's no urgency. I know they're saying non-urgent, but I kind of think of urgency as being a continuum. So if
Mhm.
we said sufficient urgency, yeah.
You had asked for an example, and I was just thinking of a woman having a baby.
Hmm.
It's kind of important and it's kind of urgent and it's due now.
Yep.
And I think the people around the individual, the woman, are going to take different levels of importance and urgency depending upon what's going on.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And of course, the child has no idea. So, except, wants to move on and get out. So, it is urgent and it is important, but the woman will take it differently than perhaps the husband, or depending upon if it's the first, second, third, or 15th.
Right.
So, I think that might be an example that fits different levels of each.
Hmm.
That's an interesting example, T, because you're describing a natural process, right? But the conditions of that process matter. So the woman has to surrender to that process. She's helping the process, but she has to surrender. Whereas everyone else, they're the observer looking at
Mhm.
the situation, so they can't even feel the intense pain that the woman is having. So that's an interesting, really interesting example.
Well, I think some people can feel the pain, some men do, or at least they perceive they do.
Right.
Right.
But I think that's why, even if you go back to the times when midwives were much more commonly encountered, that woman could usually relate to what was going on, or
Hmm.
how do you relate to that? I've watched some of these YouTubes where they put the men on the childbirth simulators, the what do they call those things? TENS units that
Hmm.
they can simulate that the guys don't last.
Yeah, there's an old story about the equivalence of a pain is probably getting kicked in the groin.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
I don't know any guy that after it's been kicked in the groin says in 2 years, I think I'd like to be kicked in the groin again.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
This priest kind of defined it this way, and I remember it because I was in about the 6th grade. He said, take your front lip and pull it all the way over the back of your head.
Oh,
Mm.
And
Oh,
yeah, glory be almighty. So, there you go.
yeah, there you go. But you're right.
all right. Is anyone else uncomfortable?
Yeah, really. So, but I think that what we're doing is we're still describing something that's a very upgrade experience, something
Mhm.
external, even though it's truly, we get it, it's inside of the woman's body, but it's external to her will at the moment or whatever.
Mhm.
Fine, we get that. It's going to overpower the situation one way or another. It's going to happen. And so that's the urgency part that's there. And of course, it's an important sort of a thing. Now, let me pull you back to the change grid though for just a second, because I want you to tell me, do you think that this is stress? Which of these is stress? Which of these is um,
I think you tilt it 45 degrees clockwise and you're done.
yeah, okay, all right. So here's how I want you guys to kind of play with this. To start off with, I have given you pardon me, the PDF files.
Bless you.
Thank you for the change cube. I believe that this is the one that we are looking at, one of these two. So we're looking at importance for sure. High importance at the top of whatever the little option you see is, and low importance at the bottom. If we're saying that urgency is going to parallel tension, then we're really looking at this square. By the way, it's duplicated because when you print it out and fold it in half, it's got color on both sides. So we're just looking at this piece right here. Let me see if I can actually zoom in. Okay. Low tension, high importance is right here. High tension, high importance is here. So let's use their words. Instead of tension, use it urgency. Low urgency, but high importance. Low tension, high importance. Oh, right.
Right.
It's going to put me here. Yeah. But now look at the other end of the importance scale. This would be at the very bottom of the change cube. Low importance, but a high level of urgency. Low importance. Wait, what am I doing with a low level of urgency? Right. So, yep, low, high. Yeah. Now, you guys have to understand, we're not looking at the top of a change grid. We're looking at a slice that goes of the vertical axis between coordinates 0, 12 and coordinates 12, 0, right? You're cutting a change grid smack dab in half. You guys with me?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So it's actually, if I zoom out here for just a second, you're actually looking at this line.
Mhm.
Now, the difference as you're looking at it, because that would mean that really up here would still be high importance, high urgency, and this is low importance. This is high importance, low urgency.
Yeah.
You guys with me on that, or did I just confuse you by saying that?
No,
Okay,
that's good.
thank you. They've not described in-grid or out-grid. The only things that I'm looking at right now is what's happening in this band, high urgency. So you can see it comes and down here, low urgency. Now, the other thing that I want to show you is if you put the cube together, you would be looking at this top surface of the change grid where all of the colors are at their darkest. The darker the color, the higher the importance was because it's sitting at the top of the change cube. Where if we look at the bottom of the change cube, you can see that everything is almost just so faint, even when you get really, really low. Ideally, it was going to go to pure white. So when you've got very low level of importance to do something, does it really matter what you think the level of urgency is going to be?
Do you even think of it?
Do you
Yeah.
even think about it?
Exactly.
Right. And so to me, it's something that's off the radar. And that's when I look at this little chart, I go try to avoid doing tasks that are neither urgent nor important. These are not worth your time. Okay, I kind of think I'm automatically deselecting those. I don't know that I'm doing a conscious process that says, I hereby deem you non-urgent and non-important. Maybe that would be a useful exercise. But I think a lot of this stuff is just getting tossed aside without us giving any conscious awareness to it whatsoever. And why would that be? Because it's not important. So it's the bottom of the change grid, and it's not urgent. So it's at the bottom of the level of tension, right? It's at the lowest level of tension and the lowest level of importance. So do you really need to do this process, or do you think it's kind of happening? You know? Now, as I go around the cube, or let's go to this other extreme. Focus
Well,
on.
T,
Yeah.
before you do, just one quick question. If
Yeah.
we extend the non-urgent and non-important lines, right? And say that they go out, then do they go out to
Mhm.
0.00?
Yeah, they do. Yep. Non-urgent. Oh, actually, um,
Totally unimportant and totally no urgency to
no
it.
drive. Well, no drive. And see, that's the second thing that I want to talk about was what happens instead of thinking that urgency is paralleling upgrid versus downgrid. Let's instead change it and say, no, it's actually in-grid versus out-grid. Now, how does it play out? So I think that's really where we're at. Because to Daniel's point, if you have low ability, low challenge, it's low importance, and at best you've got a moderate level of tension, but you have no drive to get it done. There's no momentum. There's no Maybe that's the better word instead of urgency. It's really more about drive.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I like that.
So, yeah, so that to me would be a problem. I mean, you're at the exact bottom of the change grid, or change cube rather. I mean, you're down here. Why is even on, you know? Now let's look at the other one though. Focus on these tasks. They are both time sensitive and adding value. Do these tasks first. So they are both urgent and important. Well, importance, I know, is mapping towards the height of the cube. So up here, you're at the top surface of it, the most important thing. And as you start moving your way down that importance vector, things are getting dimmer and dimmer and fuzzier and fuzzier and fuzzier, right? And so here you've got half intensity of color all the way up to full intensity of color. So that's the importance thing. But now, where is it on the change grid? Well, if urgent is mapping to upgrid versus downgrid, it would be between here and there, between the center of the change grid and coordinates between the center of the change grid and coordinates 12, 12, right? And then the other one, if it's non-urgent, but we're saying it parallels the heart line, it would be over on this side of things. So if I want to overlay those two, urgency would appear anywhere between upgrid and outgrid. But it's the question is, on what surface of the change grid are we looking at? So because if I'm outgrid and it's top importance, or I'm upgrid and it's top importance, I'm going to get that done, right? Whether it's urgency and urgency, or whether it is reactivity and drive, you know, it's still going to put me in the same place. The urgency resides is kind of a given. Yep.
Perhaps there's two components,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like quarks, different flavors.
Sure.
And one is internal, the other is external, to put it simply.
Right. External, and this would be a little bit more internal downgrid as well. Externals, tend to be
Outgrid is external, right? Or no, internal.
well,
Yes.
no,
Sorry,
outgrid
sorry,
is
sorry.
yeah, it's very internal.
Yeah.
But I think it's internal directed towards external,
Hmm.
where I think upgrid is internal, and then more directed towards internal. You know, you're trying to make yourself feel better. You're trying to get out of the situation. So there's not a whole lot of external focus going on other than the threat. This
Engagement.
yeah,
Where is engagement?
engagement is, do you see this arcing gray
Yes.
circle and this one here? Technically, we call that the engagement ring, but I would say that as you move off of the PowerPoint in the outgrid direction, one of the things that's definitely happening is movement along this continuum from awareness all the way out to execution. So you're getting here, the intention is being formed. Here, we're getting actively doing the things that need to be done. Here, we're killing it, you know? So I think that you're seeing an increasing level of engagement, even though we use labels to describe certain stopping points.
And as we become more engaged with one thing, we release other things as a general rule.
You have to.
And so, is there a component of urgency causing us to release something or not to release it?
See, and I don't know if it's being motivated by our definition of urgency or by our definition of drive. You know, I mean, urgency feels like something is compelling me, and drive sounds like I'm compelling me.
That's what it sounds like to me. I'm thinking of the difference between you having a sympathetic reaction versus parasympathetic. So in other words, parasympathetic, you're calming yourself down, but sympathetic is something external to yourself, typically triggers that, you know, that ignites the amygdala to, you know, want to fight or flight. And so, but it's typically external that could trigger that, something that you perceive as danger, something that you perceive as a threat.
Yeah, someone to fight as opposed to someone to run away from.
Right.
He does
Which
the.
I think
Does the
I think
slide,
that
Oh, sorry,
ahead.
Daniel, and then Tim.
I think that that getting into that fight flight area
Uh-huh.
is all about danger zones, number one,
Yeah, right.
right?
Yep, you're in a danger.
And that when we get into them, especially if we're driven, if we're going out grid, and some situation changes, which is external up grid, some situation changes, but we don't recognize it perhaps, or we don't see it for what it is, or see our place in it for what it is. And then we get into the danger zone because we're continuing to try to do what we've always done to get where we've gotten, right?
Right.
And we're not making the kind of shift that we need to make, which is critical,
Yeah.
right, for people in all walks. That that engagement goes into overdrive
It certainly can. And that's the big,
and out of control.
right, because one of the things we're going to be talking about after we figure out where these planes actually are and how they actually go is that, well, are we describing something that goes to all the extremes? Are we actually in the danger zones? How is that different than if we're between the green and the red circle? How is it different if we can keep ourselves inside of the green circle? So there'll be that element coming into play as well. But I do think, oh,
And
wait, Tim, you wanted to add something, go right ahead.
I was going to ask you, could you show the slide on the layer on degrees? And I'm just wondering, does that help illustrate? I'm sorry, the on the change grid, you know, the slide, this what,
Oh,
70?
yeah. This one
Does that, yeah, does that, you know, help with the
with the intensity.
of the urgency conversation?
Oh, but
Yeah.
I like that because now we're basically saying that as we move further out grid, we know that the intensity is changing. So there's that intensity is certainly here. Keep in mind that it's even higher than we would find up in stress because we don't have to achieve, no, we don't have to find ourselves in this degree of intensity. No, we don't need to find ourselves as intense as a 6 or a 7 to get out of harm's way. 5 is enough to get our movement forward. Where if everything else is otherwise comfortable, we have the 6 and 7 available to us to drive even further. Once we're out in 7, we are really doing things that could be counterproductive, self-damaging. It's too intense. You're a driven driver. Okay, you're causing accidents if you aren't about to be in one.
AT.
Yep. Go ahead, Chris.
Hey, so I was thinking about a situation where somebody could be in apathy with a task that is of high importance and urgency.
Absolutely.
A lot of people live in a space where I like that Tim went to this slide because I was thinking about how time and tension plays. Like a lot of people like to wait to the last minute to get things done. So
Yep.
they can be carrying that high importance, high urgent task down in apathy until time hits.
Right. Now, I think to illustrate that by looking, so you guys can get comfortable looking at the diagram, what Chris has just described is, first of all, we are looking at the top surface of the change grid where importance is at its highest. And so that means all the colors that we would be filling these in with would be very vivid and deep, etc. So just know for certain that the reason why we've always been comfortable showing the change grid as a two-dimensional diagram is because we've always said that that importance is assumed when we're looking at someone's change grid. Why did they put it on their change grid if it wasn't important? Now, if you're doing group profiling, that's a very different question, which is why we do poll for the level of importance someone attaches to a task. But when you're using this for yourself, you're using this with an individual client who's come up with their own activity list, it is fair to assume that whatever's on the change grid was important enough. Now, that might not mean they were all 12s on the importance scale, but 10, 11, 12, I mean, they were important enough. And so then Chris says, but they're down in apathy about it. So this person has got very high perceived level of ability, low perceived level of challenge, a low sense of urgency, if I'm going to go the vertical one, and only a moderate level of drive at best, depending on where they happen to be. I mean, I could be over here and don't have as much drive, but and still be in that little slice of the pie I'm talking about. So you guys with me? When you really want to talk about where someone is on the change grid, you can give me 5 planes of description for that. So yeah, you with that? Do you want to walk that through that again? Or?
Yeah,
Yeah,
walk
it's
through
not,
them again.
Yeah, so the
And-
5 are the ones we look at 2-dimensional is someone's perceived level of ability and perceived level of challenge is going to tell us where they plop on the change grid. The level of importance tells us how close we are to the top surface of the change grid. So when we are looking at a change grid that a client created for themselves, or you created for yourself, or you created it together, you can assume that the activities were important enough, or why are they on the list? How'd they get on the list? Again, it's different for group profiling. Now, I know that your importance is strong. I know your ability is low. I know the challenge, our ability is high, challenge is low, but I also know by doing a horizontal line and a vertical line, that's what this X is that goes inside the change cube. I'm looking at drive and the person to be where I'm talking about down here. Their drive could be as low as whatever number that would be, 5, I think. Yeah, 5, 4, and could be as high as all the way out here, 8, 9, something like that, and still be at the place I wanted to be. 6, 7, yeah, 8, still be where I'm to be. All right, and that's being picky you. So you guys just get the vibe of what I'm basically saying is that the drive is only moderate. And think about what he said. These people are at work. They know they've got to at least appear to be busy. So there is a little bit of drive that's going on, even if it just looks like they're putzing. Or what was George Costanza's book? Didn't he write a book about how to look busy while doing absolutely nothing? So, that is what could be going on here. And as far as the level of tension is concerned, they're low urgency, they're low tension. So that maps to urgency that way. We talked about drive here this way. So yeah, that's what we're looking at, 5 different dimensions, if you will, or 5 different
that's
planes.
why I like that idea of what you had talked about previously about a continuum. I see both of them as a continuum.
They are.
Right? Because when you have a sympathetic reaction, you don't start at 100. Your response will drive you further and further out. Because you got to remember, there's no behavior that acts as a single actor. It has co-conspirators in terms of the environment, in terms of how you memorize different experiences that the brain is making these associations with. That's how you process fear.
Sure.
Right? It's based to some kind of narrative, some kind of identity. So all of those things become variables and key factors into what goes into that response. It's an integrated thing. So it's both
Right.
physiological, psychological at the same time. And over a continuum of just responding the same way, you literally can drive yourself to the danger zones. But I don't think you start there.
Right. I don't either. Well, I mean, again, the question is how fast does the brain operate, isn't it? Because I don't think that if I'm out for a little walk and suddenly a giant bear appears, that I'm going to gently and ever so slowly move myself up grid. I think there's going to be this almost instantaneous awareness and reaction to it, even though I know it wasn't instantaneous. There was a process of evaluation that my brain did all by its little lonesome.
Yeah, in fact, that's a biological process. See, because
Right.
when these things happen to us, they happen first physiologically. That's why I always say the brain is playing catch up to where the body has already been. The
Yeah.
emotions doesn't need cognition to figure out what to do. And that's the whole point. They operate faster than your reasoning capacities. But when you bring them both together, now you can make an informed decision instead of just reacting. So there's a
Right.
difference.
Right. Well, good. All right. So let's
Well,
move on to yeah, go right ahead. Daniel, was that you?
yeah, I just wanted to say, tagging on with Brian, there is an entire component of learning, right? Of experience.
Yeah.
Have you seen a bear before? Have you ever heard of a bear?
Right.
Have you ever seen anything of a bear except on television? And were they all bad bears? And now there's a bear in front of you. How do you respond? Well, you respond the way that you learn from watching people on television
Mhm.
in many cases. So there's all of the elements of one's life leading to that moment all feed in. It's extremely individual and variable.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's again, why we know it's going to overlay on the change grid or on the change cube. The question is just really where and when does it serve us well and when does it become problematic? And so as I was looking at this matrix, I kind of went like, focus on these tasks. They're both time sensitive and adding value. And so I thought, well, I suppose I could do this and they would be up grid, or I suppose I could do this and move that out grid, but that's not going to work. I need it to be a mirror image. I need to flip it around. So because I don't think that I want to schedule the things. No, maybe this is all right. I don't know. I don't know. So you guys with me? I'm doing this. I'm talking out loud just for the fun of it. This is what we go through. We go, all right, well, are they upgraded? And that's why I'm focusing on them because they're time sensitive and I need to do these tasks first. In which case, am I delegating these that are a little bit more, they're time sensitive, but don't help me accomplish my goal?
I
And
would just move it a little bit more to the left, to the right.
a little bit
Mhm.
more to the
Turn it.
right, to the right, to the
No,
right.
no, no, no. Turn it, like
Turn it.
Ah,
Yeah.
rotate it clockwise.
just about there.
All right. And so then we would be saying that if I were to now enlarge this, you guys are doing exactly what I wanted you to do. That's very nice. We just need to perfect our angle. There we go. That's not even close, but it's closer. But there you kind of go. We're trying to, yeah. So what would happen then is that to overlay this on the surface of the change grid, we would need to draw a vertical line, draw the heart line. So draw a line to represent the level of tension, draw a line. And when we draw that big X in the middle, we end up with a triangular shaped area here. What is this? Get out of my way. Yeah. Stop helping me. All right, so we would end up with a triangular piece here to here to here to there. You guys with me?
Mm-hmm.
And that would be, those are the tasks that need to be focused on.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'd say, well, then you've also got this triangle that is going from 12-12 to 6-6 down to 12-0 back. You got this triangle. That's where the lesson would be delegate these things. They're not time sensitive, but they do help us accomplish our goals and see what's underneath that. But I have driven analytical and analytical driver energies coming together. That's the people to delegate to. And then on the in-grid side of things, schedule tasks that are important, but not time sensitive. Put these on your calendar. Well, that would be this triangle. If I went up here, so 0-12 to 6-6 to 0-0, that triangle would be scheduled tasks. Huh.
Mm.
Not so sure about that.
But,
I think we can correct
but
it.
I think the radius has some effect.
I think you're absolutely
I
right.
think we're in the green circle.
Okay, that's what we're going to talk about. What happens if we're at the extremes? And then, so this one would be the one that's this lower circle. Most of it is made up of power, apathy, and apathy. And so to try to avoid tasks that are neither urgent nor important. However, we're down here only because they're not urgent, right? Importance is about the surface.
Mhm.
Anyone else having a headache now?
Well, this reminds me of that thing where you have to extend lines out to be able to connect everything. And so I'm thinking
Yes.
that it's not it's not a rectangle. It's not that. It's almost, I don't know.
Yeah.
It needs to expand out one and one, and the other ones kind of push in. Like,
Yeah. Well,
I think if you just remove the boxes around, the 1, 2, 3, 4, just
oh yeah.
remove the boxes, leave the words.
It would work somewhat, but here's, I think, the reason again, we're trying to get it to fit on top of the surface of the cube that is all about perceived challenge versus perceived ability. But this isn't about either one of those dimensions. It's about perceived importance versus the perceived level of tension someone has. You know what I mean? It's like, I need to insert this vertically, smack dab through my cube this way. So what's really as far upward as it can go, yeah, are these tasks, these are still there, and these are still, this is still going to hold true. And I think these do as well, but it's not the emphasis of the diagram. This is both fascinating and frustrating at the exact same time. Now, to whoever made the point, I think, Daniel, you proposed it, and I think Kathy reinforced it. I do think it kind of overlays in the center of the change grid in the ideal world. I mean, I think if we could sit down with our to-do list for a given day and say these things are very urgent and very important, and these are not so urgent and not so important, and these are blah, and these are blah, I could feel like that's a very good thing for getting my act together for the day, right? Just
Quick assessment.
yeah, just notice that in the act of doing it, I've done something. And by definition, if I'm doing something, where am I not? You know,
Down grid.
I'm not at the center of the change grid. I'm not down grid. I'm not up grid. I'm not there anymore. I've moved a direction. What direction have I moved as I've start to plop things into these different,
You move
Out.
out grid.
I'm moving a little bit out grid. I'm doing something. I'm going somewhere. I'm making something happen. So to Kathy's point, maybe it needs to get shifted a little bit in and out, just so we can kind of see where these tasks are going to fall. And you know what? Maybe we're not as well organized or as good of a planner as that. And suddenly, oh no, we've got activities that aren't inside of the green circle to be discussing. Now they're between the green and the red. Life is being lived, and I got to get pulled into stuff and figure stuff out and whatever else may happen. So that's going to either add a level of intensity or pull it away from where the energy really is to get things done.
Gee, I think the great coaching conversation with a client would be whatever task they plot in that focus triangle as you walk through.
Yeah.
What then is their perceived ability and challenge to get those tasks done?
That's where I wanted to end up, because I think that we could say all day long, this task is urgent and important, but that doesn't guarantee someone's going to get it done,
Nope.
right? I can be, and I think someone said it earlier on, I can be deep down in apathy about all kinds of things that are urgent and important. I'll give a little wiggle room there. But if I think it's unimportant and it's urgent, I mean, I don't have to do anything just based on importance
Mhm.
and someone else's urgency. Am I right?
Absolutely. And, you know, when I was introduced to this, it was in health design thinking. So apparently design thinkers use this kind of thing all the time. And so what we would do when we go through design sprints is like what Tim just described. So like those tasks that we said are urgent and have importance, those become projects that we focus on now. The others are things you put in a folder somewhere. They may get done later, but we're looking at it from that perspective of ability. Like, what resources do we have? How resourceful is the team right now? So we're going through this whole survey process that helps us with deciding on what to focus on now that has the greatest net value, even potential value. And I didn't even know it was the Eisenhower matrix, but it's used in design sprints all the time.
Yep. And so I do kind of think that to Tim's point, if you put together an activity list and said, hey, this is all the stuff you got to get done, where are you on the change grid when it comes to doing it? Well, how well does it bode for the future if someone is deep down in apathy on every single one of these activities that they need to focus on? There's urgency.
Not well.
No, not well at all. And I don't want to police the person into doing this, because if they're down in apathy, I got to keep pushing the urgency and pushing the importance. I got to do something to build a fire under the people in apathy to get these mission critical things done. Now, if they got activities, I know that if they got activities that are plotting down in power apathy, or even the lower half of power, I can certainly see that this is the right thing we'd be telling them to do. Delegate these tasks
Mhm.
so that we can accomplish the goal. And keep in mind, based on how we've rotated things, you know, this portion of this delegate thing is still up here in power for the most part, powered a little bit of power apathy. So that's the right spot for that to happen. And I can certainly say that, look, if you're down here where your ability is all over could be of the full range, but the challenge is a 6 at best, do you really need to be doing that? Is that below your pay grade? I mean, isn't there something more? I don't want to use the word important because we're assuming it's important. And then the scheduling of things. My hesitation about scheduling is that I just don't know that someone who perceives themselves as having an ability of a 1 or a 2 to do an activity. Um, I I just don't see how they're scheduling something. Doesn't it seem like whether they schedule it or not, it doesn't seem like they can really do it. So I'm a wee bit concerned.
I I take that a little differently, T,
All right.
and that is you know, it's like a least task kind of thing. Just schedule it,
Well,
just
right,
delegate it, right? Just avoid it
right.
or
And now,
focus.
and that strengthens this case for the thought that it would all be shifted out grid. Oh, sorry, I got to rotate it again. Sorry, my rotation is screwed up. Yeah, this is how we want it. But maybe it really is more over here.
Yeah, especially when you consider the engagement rings. I was thinking of it
Yeah,
because where awareness is, because those 4 options are, I think they all begin around some level of awareness, not pre-awareness
absolutely.
or unawareness.
You can't be sub-aware, whatever word we gave to it, that oblivious kind of place on the change grid. You're involved here. So maybe it does what we've described it to do, theoretically. And by the way, that would then put scheduling the tasks as an overlay on this amiable driver energy, which is where the chief operating officer tends to live.
Mm.
So I can make some room for that. I mean, graphically, obviously I can't, but you know, wouldn't it be great to be able to have AI, graphic AI, that as you were describing something, it would be changing the illustration live to improve itself until it really is exactly. We could say, oh no, rotate it 12 degrees and do a mirror flip, but don't make the words backwards. Wouldn't that be cool if we could do that?
Coming. It's coming.
It's got to be coming, but boy,
I've been looking at this and thinking about the idea that the center of the change grid is like, you know, taking your center, whether it's in martial arts or taking a moment to compose yourself in a debate or anything else, right?
yeah,
That is that in receiving something that or looking at something and that's a challenge and saying, okay, first level analysis, what am I going to do? So it's like I'm in the center, I'm centering myself, and then I'm making a decision. Am I going to focus on it and go that way? Am I going to schedule it
right,
and go that way? You know, that
right,
it
right.
seems to me that wherever you are, this is an opportunity to step back into the center, take stock, and make a decision.
Exactly. And so depending on, let me just shrink this down just a little bit. I didn't even know that I was able to do this. Behold. Um, yeah. So Daniel, your thought is that because this is all out grid, before I do any of these kinds of things, I can return to inside my green circle, into my PowerPoint, and then I can try to really detach, evaluate, make the best decision, and then get back out here and get the work done. There, yeah.
Right. Then step into the zone
Serves it best. Yeah.
where you project the success.
Right, right,
And I
right.
think that's what the tool was designed for, actually, is to get people into those things that Daniel and Chris were talking about in terms of awareness. That's why you use it as this process of evaluating different components of whatever project or something that you're dealing with. So that's where the change grid itself can really help people look at those four uns, that particularly like if you're unaware, are you suitable, are you able, are you willing?
Right.
And then can put these in the right perception wise, so you can, develop the right perspective and continue to develop from there in terms of your resources, resourcefulness, and those kinds of things.
Excellent. All right.
I agree with you, T, that the scheduling is the one part that doesn't seem to have a fit,
right.
on the change grid per se.
Right. But if I squish it down this far, can you guys see that this piece right here of the amiable driver energy is part of this? The scheduling is here. I think an amiable driver would do a job. They would schedule something. They'd figure it out. But not way up here, not way over here, only in this little section I'm talking about right here. That's when they would be doing something more inside the circle, but still going and making something happen. I think that this individual, who is the lower half of the amiable driver and the in-grid half of the analytical driver, this is the one that's being a little bit more aware of how resources are being used. That's both analytical and considerate. We'd find from that amiable energy. So avoiding those kinds of tasks, but let avoidance be a strategic avoidance. And you definitely have this energy of the change grid. We're down grid in apathy. We just avoid because, well, that's what we do when we're in apathy. So if we are now half of the driven driver subquadrant and half of the outgrid part of the analytical driver, delegate would resonate there very well because there's a lot of calculation involved. I don't necessarily need to do it. I can get it done and etc. Where if I'm up here, where part of me is inside of this expressive driver, I'm a driven expressive driver or an expressive driven driver. That expressive energy is what's really moving me with that urgency word a little bit more. I know I'm urgent out here, but it's like more I'm on mission. I'm driven to do it, but there's also a level of tension that's contributing to this. So focus on these tasks. They're both time sensitive and adding value. Do these tasks first. That feels very right to me. Yeah. Thoughts about that, everyone? Yeah. Now, again,
Now, not to throw anything stupid into the mix, but I just had this sudden insight that importance might have to do with immediacy
Yeah.
of reward or
right, or avoidance.
consequence.
Right. Yeah. Now, to the danger zone question, I think, Dan, you just shared that it is true that a big chunk of this in this specific overlay would be in the danger zone. So is it possible that focusing on tasks that are time sensitive and adding value, do these tasks first? Is it possible that how I go about doing that could be a dangerous approach to take? What's the dark side?
Could be. Yeah, it could be.
Yeah. I might be just jumping on it and just in it to win it, not really seeing a lot of things that are going on. So I can see there's a dangerous element here. And this delegate thing, I might be delegating things very prematurely, tossing things to people, assuming I've delegated it well. But I've just said yeah.
I think that those two both clearly speak to what's taking place in Israel.
Yeah.
The entire attack, right? As you said, what's the dark side?
Yep.
There's your dark side.
Yeah, the dark side is most definitely, again, in this danger zone. Remember, one of the adjectives that you find in the danger zone is warmongering. So not at all surprising to say, wow, we really can see parallels in world events.
You know what? Another dark side is that if you're only thinking about yourself and doing these things and saying they have to be done and you can do them, you're not being inclusive in getting other opinions.
Right. Yep. And so it's all, and again, that would be characteristic of someone who is in this execution mode where they're just getting it done. They're not listening to people anymore. They're facing only forward. And so they forget that there's all these resources, all these people behind them doing things that need to be.
Or worse, just totally ignore it as in someone who says, I am the only one who can.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Because again, narcissism lives out here. So
Amen.
See, I think that if they're out there towards the danger zone, the risk there is that skill, that contribution is not going somewhere else on that activity list that's needed.
Right. So a squandering of resources could happen here. But it's also you become your own worst enemy. I mean, if you're focused, but your focus is ill-placed, or you're delegating, but your delegations are premature, this does not bode well for your own worst enemy. You're the one that's driving your train, if you will, off of the, what do they fly off of? The bridge, I guess. I'm not up on my train metaphors, but I liked where we were going with it. All right. Okay, interesting discussion. Thank you,
I
Isaac.
have a thought.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting to note that when would you pull this particular Eisenhower matrix into a conversation with a client?
Oh, yeah.
When they're in the danger zone, right? How can we take care of this task?
Yeah. I would say that they definitely need to have this discussion when in the danger zone. And I don't know if they're quite ready to hear it yet, but do a little bit of work to get them ready. And this is exactly what you do, because I have used this particular tool when I was going in on a needs assessment stage of a client relationship. And I'd ask the question, what are you guys doing with your time? So what activities are you doing? Are you getting done? Show me your activity logs for the last whatever time period is. And now I want you to tell me, go to next, even to say, was this both urgent and important when you did it? Was it non-urgent but important when you did it? What was how would you assess the conditions that nevertheless resulted in you doing it? And then you can show it to the powers that be and say, well, the first thing you guys need to learn is a little bit of how about some project planning, some tension management just around the act of putting together what your business needs to do.
Yeah, I think it's useful. In addition to outside in the danger zone, I think it's useful wherever they plot. For me, when I'm working with clients with the grid, I actually start with where they plotted based on importance of task.
Yes.
As opposed to starting with, what
red
perceived ability and challenge to be, because that's where their attention and energy is going to go, in my opinion. And so to Chris's point earlier, if someone is plotting on a particular task, downgrade, if they see it as less urgent and less important, their leadership might have seen it differently. And that help explain why certain things are not getting done in the time in which they need to be done, or not getting the resources that they should be getting, is because their perception of its importance could be that it's less urgent and less important than what the organization believes.
That's right. And so we could even go back now into pride-based leadership and say, if someone doesn't realize how important this is, well, importance is my job as a leader. I'm the one who's got to be selling you on importance. And urgency should be coming from someone who's doing the management side of things, the time planning, all that. Someone who's really trying to run the show. If those things aren't happening, then there's a gap in skill set. That could certainly be something we could train towards. So I do think there's lots of different ways that you could use it, but I think it's, to me, it fits in as the assessment level.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But again, I've never gone through, my background is not in project planning. For all I know, the people that are becoming certified project managers, this could be an essential element in the work that they do and how they do it. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well,
It certainly can, because oftentimes people want to push their pet projects because they're important to them.
yeah,
But in the overall mission, they really are not.
right. Exactly. And so,
And that's politics.
yeah, someone's got to sell that. That's the whole thing. It's kind of like it's a reflection of poor leadership. If people
Hey,
aren't,
T, I got a question.
Yep.
If you're trying to get someone to gauge importance and unimportance or urgency and non-urgency,
Mhm.
are you going to put a number to the
Oh, yeah.
scale to get the, yeah?
Yeah, you can count on it. Yeah. I'm going to do my best to use my regular 13-point scale, so 0 to 12, whenever I can, because keep in mind, if I wanted to say where in the change cube are they, and by the way, I'm sure you guys can guess how often you've worked with a client who could wrap their head around movement in 3-dimensional space, but nevertheless, you know, their location has got 3 different coordinates, right? They got a coordinate for ability, challenge, and importance. So I can tell you exactly where inside of this cube the person might be floating around. I don't know that that's valuable to do, but it is interesting. So
It's going to make a great movie.
yeah, well, that's my whole point. You know, it's like, all right, we have to realize that we've got hundreds of hours of content far beyond anything that would be marketable, you know, because the world needs basics. They don't need, you know, 80% of the stuff we all talk about on the merging of brilliance. Do we kind of get that this is just something for us? That maybe if we're lucky, we can stumble across an occasional new person who can meet us in our madness, if you will. And if so, please invite them. They're welcome to join the circle. So, yeah. All righty, enough for now. So thanks everybody for joining in. We will come up with what it is on Thursday. I want to get back to those American values. I think they are interesting things to explore. And I do want to talk about where values live on the change grid too. All right, so with that, thank you all very much for joining in. Bye for now.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Good
Bye,
day,
y'all, and a good
everyone.
week.
Bye.
Yeah.
Oh, happy Halloween, by the way.
Happy Halloween, yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Happy birthday to my youngest son.
Oh, that's right. Happy birthday. All right, bye everybody.